Right, this is the first lesson in the percents unit in Math 8. Today we're looking at representing percents in different ways. So first let's define what a percent is. Percent means out of 100. So for example, or it's another name for hundredths. So for example, 95% literally means 95 out of 100. So if I were to write this as a fraction, you could write it as 95 out of 100. And if you wanted to write it as hundredths, as a decimal, you would write 0.95, so 95 hundredths. Those all mean the same thing. Okay, so let's represent percents visually to start. So since they're out of 100, we're going to be using these 100 grids. So there's 100 squares in each of these grids. So let's start off with something more simple. So 75%, we would want to color in 75% of this grid, or 75 of these 100 squares. So there's a couple of ways we can do it, but I'm just going to color in 7 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then 5 squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that there is 75% of the grid is colored in. Okay. Let's do a harder one. Now this is called a decimal percentage because the percentage has a decimal number. So 13.6%. So a little bit more than 13%. So if I wanted to represent this on a grid, I would first color in 13%, so 13 of these squares. And then we would want to do 0.6 of one final square. So something a little more than half, but we want to show that exactly. So what I'm going to do is do like a little zoom in of that square there. And I'm going to split this into 10. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to color in 6/10 because 0.6 means 6 out of 10. 6/10. There we go. So that's just like a little zoom in of what's colored in there so you can see exactly. Okay, 52 1/4. This is called a fractional percent. So it means I'm going to color in 52 squares and then 1/4 of the final square. So first I'll do 50, which is exactly half. And that way I can go a little bit faster. It's important to be able to visualize these percentages so you can understand what they mean. Okay, and then we want to do 1/4 of this final square. So it's hard to see it if I just try and do it here. So I'm going to zoom in again and draw it larger and show that we're coloring in exactly 1/4. If I had a ruler, I would do a better job at dividing that up nice and evenly, but you get the idea. Okay, let's practice now converting between the different representations I had up top here. So I had a percentage, a fraction, and a decimal number. They all mean the same thing, and it's important that we understand how to convert between them because in everyday life and in mathematics, you're going to see all of those representations given to you all the time. So there's sort of this classic arrow diagram here. We're going to fill in some information using an example. I'm going to start with a fraction this time. Let's start with the fraction 1/5. So if we want to go to a decimal, we just simply divide. So we do 1 divided by 5 equals 0.2. And if I want to change that into a percent, I would multiply it by 100. So I would do, so multiply it by 100. So I do 0.2 times 100 equals 20. So it'd be 20%. And then if I want to change it back into a fraction again, I would make it out of 100. So we'll see that we get 20 out of 100, which actually isn't 1/5, but if we reduce it, by dividing the top and bottom, the numerator and denominator by 20, we do get 1 over 5. Yeah, so that's kind of how you want to go between here. If you want to go in the other direction, you just do the opposite of these things. So here, and we'll practice that actually in the table below. So I've just shown that one direction, but you can also go in the other direction too. All right, so let's fill out this table. We're first going to go from percents to decimals to fractions. So when we go from percents to decimals, we divide by 100 since percents are out of 100. So we end up moving the decimal. So right now there's a decimal right here behind the 17. So when you divide something by 100, a fast, quick and easy way to do that without a calculator is just to move the decimal place over 2 spots. And so it becomes 0.17. So same with the 135%, that becomes 1.35. And then for the 0.9%, it's going to become 0.009. As a fraction, I'm going to start from the decimal numbers. And the way that you can write a fraction from a decimal number is you just want to count the number of places after the decimal, and that's how many zeros you're going to put in your fraction. So here we have 2 spots after the decimal, so I'm going to make it out of 100, and I have 17 hundredths. So my fraction is 17 out of 100. Same thing here, I have 2 places after the decimal, so it's going to be out of 100, and I just simply write the number 135. So I have 135 hundredths. Now this one can be reduced if I divide the top and bottom by 5. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I get 27 over 20. Okay, 0.009. This one is going to be out of 1,000 because there's 3 spots after the decimal. So it's going to be, we have thousandths here, and I just simply write the number 9, and I cannot reduce that one. Okay, let's start with some decimals this time. So when I go this direction to a percent, I'm going to multiply by 100. So that entails moving the decimal over 2 spots to the right if you want to do this without a calculator. So it becomes 71%. This one becomes 37.5%. And 2.4 becomes 240%. So anytime you have a number larger than 1, you're going to get a percentage that's larger than 100%, which is possible. We're going to talk about some examples where that occurs. Okay, now let's go from decimals to fractions. So we're going to use that same strategy we just practiced before. If you want to pause the video here and try it yourself, you can do that. I'm going to erase the little arrow markings that I have and use them for counting again. So here we have 2 spots after the decimal place, so I'm going to use 2 zeros, so it's going to be out of 100, and I'm going to write the number 71. So I have 71 hundredths. Here I've got 3 spots after the decimal place, so I'm going to make it out of 1,000, and I have 375 thousandths. We can reduce this one. We can divide it by, I think, 125. You don't have to reduce it all at once. You could do it a couple times. If you divide by 5 3 times, you'll still get the same reduction, and you get 3 out of 8. And then 2.4, that's going to be only out of 10. So we have 24 tenths, and we can reduce this one by dividing by 2. So we get 12 over 5. Okay. All right. Last but not least, we have fractions into decimals and then into percents. So to get a fraction into a decimal, we simply divide. So 11 divided by 12, if we do that on a calculator, we are going to get a repeating decimal. We get 0.91, and then it goes 6666666. So we can show that by putting a bar over top, or you can write it like this, 0.9166666, and then do dot 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 to show that it keeps going on forever. What you don't want to do is round it off, because we want to represent the decimal exactly how it is, not as a rounded off version. So, and then going over to our percentages, we would just multiply by 100, so we would move the decimal over 2 spots. So it would be 91.6 repeating percent. Okay, let's try this one. We divide. 2 divided by 5,000 is 0.0004. Move the decimal over 2 spots, multiply by 100, you get 0.04%. It's a very small percentage. And last but not least, we have 7/3. When you divide that, we're going to get another repeating decimal. It's 2.3 repeating, or we could think of it as 2.33333, on and on and on forever. And when we move the decimal over 2 spots, it becomes 233.3 repeating percent. We put the repeating after we write the decimal place. Okay, so there you go. There's converting between decimals, percents, and fractions for you. All right, and that is the end of the lesson.